Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a topic that, honestly, might sound like a bit of a bureaucratic headache at first glance, but getting a sales tax permit in the state of Utah is actually one of the most empowering, absolutely critical steps you're going to take for your business's success. We're going to demystify all the paperwork, cut right through the confusion, and give you a crystal clear path to compliance. So, let me ask you a pretty high-stakes question right off the bat. Are you operating legally in Utah? Because if you're making sales and you don't have this permit, you could be exposing yourself to some really severe financial and legal risks, and nobody wants that. Securing this permit isn't just about paying taxes, it's literally your official license from the state granting you the legal protection and the solid business foundation you need to thrive. Let's make sure your business is built on solid ground. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll figure out if you even need a permit. Then we'll talk about preparing your application, walk through a step-by-step guide, look at what happens after you're approved, dive into a case study on staying compliant, and finally, go over some resources. All right, Section 1, do you actually need a permit? The big defining concept here is a term called nexus. And that basically just means you've established enough of a presence in Utah that the state requires you to collect and pay sales tax. There are two primary ways you can trigger this. The first is physical nexus, which is super straightforward. If you've got a brick-and-mortar storefront, an office, employees working on the ground, or honestly, even just inventory sitting in a third-party warehouse somewhere in Utah, boom, you have physical nexus. You have to register. But what if you're entirely out of state? Well, that's where economic nexus comes in. You can actually trigger the requirement to hold a Utah permit simply based on the sheer volume of your sales into the state without ever setting foot there. So let's break down exactly what triggers that economic nexus. If you're a remote seller, you have to get a permit if your gross revenues from Utah sales cross the $100,000 mark in either the current or the previous calendar year. Now, historically, there was a second trigger too, making 200 or more separate transactions. But it is absolutely vital to note that a recent law, Senate Bill 47, actually repealed that 200 transaction threshold, and that change takes effect on July 1st, 2025. So, depending on when you're watching this explainer, just keep a really close eye on your revenue volume, because that $100,000 mark is for sure the primary trigger you need to watch. Moving right along to Section 2, preparing your permit application. You know, the absolute best way to save time and prevent frustrating errors is to just gather all your required information before you even open up a web browser. Here is your pre-flight checklist. You're going to need your federal employer identification number or your social security number if you happen to be a sole proprietor without employees. You'll need to know your exact legal business structure, plus the 6-digit NAICS code that best describes your specific industry. You'll also need estimated sales figures, which we'll get to in just a second. But pay really close attention to this slightly surprising requirement. For your physical address, if you're an in-state business, you absolutely cannot use a P.O. box. No way. It has to be a physical storefront, warehouse, or office address. Remote sellers, on the other hand, well, you guys can just use your primary out-of-state corporate address. All right, Section 3, our step-by-step application guide. So, you've gathered your documents, and now you're ready to cross that regulatory threshold. Let's walk through the actual application, and this brilliantly illustrates exactly where you need to go. You'll want to navigate directly to the Taxpayer Access Point, often called TAP, which is at tap.utah.gov. Right there, you'll select Apply for Tax Accounts, TC69. Now, you might be wondering, why do we do this online? Because registering through the TAP portal takes about 7 to 14 business days. If you print and mail the paper form, you are looking at a painfully slow 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even longer while they process it by hand. Always choose the online route. Once you're inside, the sequence is highly logical. Step 1, you select your entity type and make sure to check sales and use tax as your primary account. Step 2, you enter your identity details and that physical address we just talked about. Step 3, and listen, this is absolutely crucial, you input your estimated sales projections. Don't just guess wildly here. The state uses these exact projections to dictate your future filing frequency, meaning whether you'll be filing monthly, quarterly, or annually. Finally, you verify all your info, submit the form, and, pro tip, write down that confirmation code immediately. You will definitely need it if you ever have to contact support about your application. Now, I need to make you aware of this two-part approval reality, because it can be a little confusing if you aren't expecting it. Within a day or two of applying, you're going to get an email with a temporary ID. But hold your horses. You cannot finalize your online top profile just yet. You actually have to wait for the physical mail to arrive at your registered address. That envelope is going to contain your permanent 14-digit Utah sales tax account number and a totally separate PIN. You must have that PIN in hand to officially set up your secure online credentials on the TAP portal. Section 4. What happens after approval? Getting that license in the mail is a fantastic milestone for sure, but it's really just the starting line for maintaining compliance with the state of Utah. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how once you plug in that PIN from the mail, the TAP dashboard essentially becomes your command center. This is where you will actively manage your tax life. Depending on those sales volumes you estimated earlier, this dashboard tells you exactly when your returns are due, and it's the exact place you'll officially file and pay your taxes online. To stay in the state's good graces, you're going to need to follow a few post-registration best practices. First off, if you have a physical store, display the permit where people can see it. Second, ensure whatever software you use is tracking the wildly varying local tax rates across Utah. They can literally range from a combined 6.1% all the way up to 8.7% depending on the specific city. Third, obviously, file your returns on time. And fourth, listen very closely to this one. You must absolutely always file a return for every single period, even if you made 0 sales. Filing a 0 return tells the state, hey, we're still operating, we just didn't have taxable revenue this time around. Failing to file it? That's going to trigger automated penalties, and nobody has time for that. Section 5. A case study on staying compliant. To really grasp how seriously the Utah State Tax Commission takes these rules, let's look at a pretty fascinating real-world legal appeal from their records. This takes us back to a 2005 revocation case, appeal number 04-1265. The story is kind of a classic setup. A business owner had a company with substantial delinquent sales tax debts, which led the state to straight up revoke that company's permit. So the owner's bright idea, they simply formed a brand new corporation, applied for a new sales tax permit under the new name, and actually got approved. Well, the state's Taxpayer Services Division tried to immediately revoke this new permit, arguing the owner was just trying to dodge past debts. But the court ruled that legally, a corporation is defined as a separate person under the Sales Tax Act. So because the new corporation itself wasn't in violation at the time of the hearing, the license was actually allowed to stand. Now, while that particular owner managed to win their specific appeal on a technical definition, the ultimate lesson here is stark. Compliance is non-negotiable. The Tax Commission has tightened their processes up significantly since then. Today, if you or any other listed owners have a history of filing or paying sales tax late, the state explicitly requires you to pay those outstanding liabilities first. And they can even legally force you to post a really expensive surety bond before they will ever issue you a new sales tax license. Make no mistake, past mistakes will absolutely follow you. Which brings us to Section 6, Resources, and an important disclaimer. Let's wrap things up by outlining exactly where you can get help if things go sideways. Utah actually has some pretty excellent support channels. You can reach out directly via the TAP portal or shoot them an email at taxmaster@utah.gov. But here is a fantastic resource you should definitely keep in your back pocket, the Taxpayer Advocate Service. If the normal agency processes completely break down and you've made multiple unsuccessful attempts to resolve a really complex issue, this service steps right in to help untangle those bureaucratic knots and get things sorted out. So the crucial point is, well, I need to read this next part clearly for you. The information presented in this explainer is for general guidance only and may be subject to changes. Tax law is incredibly complex and constantly evolving. Please consult a professional tax advisor or a legal expert for personalized advice tailored to your specific business situation. Think of this permit as your ultimate passport to doing business in Utah. It opens the doors, it protects your assets, and it keeps you on the right side of the law. You've now got the checklist, the step-by-step roadmap, and the compliance insights you need. The only question left is, are you ready to apply? Get out there, get registered, and go grow your business. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer.